Okay, welcome everyone. We will go ahead and get started today. Today's session is maximizing data with AWS, and a couple of housekeeping items to get going on before we get started here. If you have any Q&A or any chat, please use the boxes down below. We'll monitor both of those for questions throughout, and our speaker Justin today will chime in when it's relevant or appropriate to answer any of those. First and foremost, want to thank ePlus, our main sponsor for today, as well as NetApp and AWS. So we want to thank them for their support in getting this webinar up and off the ground. Also, if you haven't joined our webinar series before, if this is your first time, we have a whole slate of topics and events. You can check out our website, RVATECH.com. We have about 4 or 5 upcoming, as well as our entire archive of past webinars is there for you to check out and view anytime you please. With that said, again, I want to thank our sponsors, NetApp, AWS, and ePlus. ePlus is actually where Justin hails from. Justin Mesher is the Vice President of Cloud and Data Center Solutions for ePlus. And as part of ePlus's global strategy team, he leads the overall strategy and go-to-market for both the cloud and data center practices. So Justin, thanks so much for your time today. We really appreciate it. And I will pass the platform to you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Nick. Good afternoon, everybody. First of all, appreciate you all joining, and thanks for having me today. I know it's not an easy time to be sitting on these Zooms all day long, especially as the kids are just starting e-learning. If you're anything like me, we were supposed to go back to school starting yesterday, and they told us on Friday all the kids were going to e-learning. So everybody's scrambling to figure that out. So I can only imagine what you guys all have going on in the background right now. Like Nick said, use the Q&A for any questions. I'll keep an eye on that. If you want to throw any kids' homework questions in there, feel free. I do cap out at Common Core Math, though. I will not touch that with the 10-foot pole. So that being said, let's jump into today's agenda. I'll just do a quick introduction on myself so you have an idea who you're talking to. I want to talk a little bit about the impacts of COVID. I think it's fairly irresponsible to have a conversation with anybody right now in technology without talking about how COVID's impacting the way that we do things. And then we'll talk about just overall modernization concepts, what that journey looks like, and then the ways that NetApp and AWS are really helping accelerate and unlock that journey for customers. All right, so first things first, who am I other than the talking head that you've allowed into your living room or office today? I've been in the IT industry for about 22 years. I live in the Chicagoland area. I went to Bradley University, which is in Central Illinois, where I got a bachelor's degree in business computer systems and have enjoyed a career in IT since then. So current role, like Nick said, is I'm the VP of Cloud and Data Center Solutions on the global strategy team for ePlus. And what that means is I spend my time with a lot of customers, understanding what their challenges are, and just making sure that our team and our solutions are best set to be able to handle those. Prior to that, I spent time at IDS, which was actually a company that got acquired by ePlus, as the CTO, leading the overall go-to-market and general technical strategy. And then I started my career back in healthcare IT back in Central Illinois back in the day. So kicking it off here, the COVID-related challenges, right? And some of these are cloud-related, some of them aren't, but I think it paints a picture for what all of us are dealing with right now. If I think back to the March-April timeframe when all this happened, the number one thing that I noticed is, my customers started talking to me in a very different way. Everybody's hair was on fire. Nobody knew what was next. And what I found is there's really a handful of really consistent challenges people were running into. The first one was around the fact that data center capacity was becoming a challenge because it could have been supply chain issues, could have been physical access to the data center, could have been CapEx freezes. And what that was leading to is cloud sprawl, or really accelerated cloud adoption. And accelerated cloud adoption does not always mean responsible cloud adoption. But we all did what we had to do, right, to keep the businesses up and running. So that was number one. Number two, which I know all of us felt pain on, is remote workforce enablement. Suddenly we have to send a lot of people, if not everybody, to work from home. And many organizations weren't quite ready for this. So there's kind of two aspects, right? One is I need employees to access data, applications, and things to be able to do their day-to-day job. But then I also need them to collaborate with each other, right? Because a large part of what we do, whether in IT or other parts of the organization, is collaboration with other coworkers, right? So those were two challenges that came up. And as people started rapidly turning on remote workers and spinning up cloud resources, we saw a massive introduction of security risks, right? So cloud was being adopted without a specific and defined security posture. Sensitive data, which was not previously allowed to be accessed from outside of the four walls, was being accessed from remote places because it had to be to keep the business going. And then finally, as we started to extend where users access from and where our services lived, now we've got management platforms that aren't quite ready for that. We have teams that aren't quite ready to completely collaborate remotely. So these are really the four key areas that we saw customers saying, man, these are hot items that, you know, even if they were a problem before, they're way worse now. What it then turned into is people started talking to us in a way that was much more about, really, it sounds simplistic up here, but it wasn't about technology problems. It wasn't about, you know, solutions and speeds and feeds. It was, number one, I need safe and healthy employees, right? That's number one priority. Number two is, once I know my employees are safe and healthy, I need them productive, right? Because that's going to lead to number three, which is ultimately, I need a healthy business. I got to weather the storm here. I need to find a way to survive and to thrive in this, you know, in this world that we're living in right now. And those are really the three key items. And I found that, you know, even the most hardcore technologists started thinking in things in that way. And then one quote that stuck with me that I heard from a CIO of a very large company was, he said he's not exactly sure what he needs right now as far as outcomes go. What he said is that he needs the flexibility for whatever this new normal becomes, right? So not knowing what's coming next, meaning that I don't want to over-rotate. I don't want to over-rotate skill sets, people, investments, anything like that into something that may or may not be relevant in, you know, tomorrow or the next week or the month after. So going into that, what we did at my company is we developed this self-assessment for our customers around technology impacts of COVID. And we just asked them a handful of questions just to figure out where are they at, where are they having challenges, with the goal of being able to come back with some insights from that data. So I'll share a couple of insights here real quick. Let me build it out. You know, the first one was around data center and cloud. We saw that, you know, over half of the companies that responded were having issues with data center capacity, and over a third of those were due to remote access needs, right? So because of having to send all these people home, they were having challenges with data center, either bandwidth or capacity of infrastructure. We saw that over a third were seeing abnormal growth in cloud, which is not unexpected based on what we talked about earlier. Remote workforce enablement, right, is that we saw that less than 32% of those people were leveraging virtual desktop infrastructure, which was kind of a nice to have previously. But if you need to send a lot of users home and give them a consistent experience and be able to manage them centrally, that's a pretty critical component now. And although we all figured out how to send our workers home and remain somewhat productive, you know, over 40% said, I'm having challenges with cost, with performance, with security. And that kind of leads down into the bottom part is, you know, over a third were not using multi-factor authentication when accessing sensitive data remotely. And over half actually checked the box saying they're not comfortable with their risk profile. And then I don't think there's any shock in the fact that your remote collaboration was a challenge. So I share those insights because we're going to talk a lot today about modernization. And some of these things are almost in a vacuum as if none of this is going on around us. But I think maintaining a finger on the pulse of what all this means and how that's going to impact where we go in the future is really critical. Okay, so modernization, right? Really, really overused term. So today we're going to talk about what does it actually mean to a technologist, right? Not just someone who's using buzzword bingo and, you know, talking about modernization and all that, but what really is it to us and why should we do it? This picture here, this is a cover from The Economist from 2017, which feels like a lifetime ago at this point. But if you think about it, 3 years ago, they were saying, you know, the world's most valuable resource is data. And they have, you know, the pictures of the big companies up there that have all of our data. So I don't think it's any secret that data has become the most valuable asset to many of our organizations, you know, for the reasons in the fact that it allows us to discover business trends. It allows us to better understand the needs of our customers and to really just establish and maintain a competitive edge. So I'm pretty sure I'm preaching to the choir there, but a lot of people struggle with how to get there, right? And the key in how to get there and the fastest way to realize that maximum value from your data is via modernization techniques, right? And embracing cloud-based technologies, because let's face it, you're going to be more agile with a cloud provider than you are inside of the data center. All right, so modernization, we'll start off with what is it, right? This is the actual dictionary.com definition of modernize, which is to make modern or to give a newer modern character or appearance to. So you'd probably be pretty mad if I just ended the presentation right there. But let's take that into some more context, right? Is application modernization, something we talk about all the time. It's the practice of refactoring, repurposing, consolidating legacy software stacks to align more closely to the needs of the business. Okay, so it's thinking, I'm not trying to replace all my applications, but I'm saying, what can I do to be more agile, more flexible, more future-proof by taking what I have and applying new modern techniques to it. And an enabler of that is data center modernization, which is really the transformation of traditional data center infrastructure into more of a services-oriented architecture, right? So it's burstable, it's cloud-enabled, it's automated, it's scalable. You know, it's really going to turn you as an IT organization into a service provider that leverages not just your own assets, but can leverage the cloud as an extension of the platform of where your IT group is deploying services. I put this up there. I totally stole this. I did put the source down at the bottom. It's from awsgeek.com. But I use this to show, you know, this is, they created a periodic table of Amazon Web Services. And this is actually like a year out of date, but I just like the graphic because it shows there are so many things. There's so many services that AWS does. I don't know any organization in the world who's using all of these. You know, if you can tell me that you understand what Fargate and Neptune and Pinpoint and all these things are, first of all, I think you're probably either misrepresenting that, or I'd like to hire you. But the reality is it's impossible for everybody to know what these are. The key is if you can turn services on like this, it really gives you capabilities you can never dream of inside your data center, right? So when we talk about modernization, why do we want to do it? We want to do it because in order for me to deploy all these services in my data center, if I even could, it would be millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars to actually figure all that out. Okay, so I'm going to talk through today the concept of what I call the journey to modernization. And I want to preface this with the fact it's not a journey you as an organization are going to go on. It's not like a one-time thing. This is something where you are going to take an application, a workload, a data set, something that you want to modernize because you have an outcome you want to achieve. And you're going to take that specific workload or application through this journey. This is going to be a journey that you're going to continue and rinse and repeat on. And it becomes a life cycle for modernization or for cloud adoption. So think about you find a workload that needs modernization for some reason. The first place to start with is what is the outcome I'm looking for? It's critical to start from that. You always need a business aligned cloud strategy. So you look at it and say, you know, what's the thing I want to do tomorrow that I can't do today? You identify what that is, and then you look at, okay, what's in scope for that? What's the application, the data sets? What are the dependencies of that application and the data sets? Who are the end user and customers that are affected by any sort of change of this? And then you look at the cloud or modernization readiness, right? Is this a workload that is extremely portable and ready to move wherever it can be best fit and best modernized? Is it something that could move but requires a little bit of change or examination? Or is it something that's really legacy, and if you try to pick it up and move it, it's going to break, and you're going to need to do some work before you move it? Understanding that before you do anything is critical, and then integrating in your cloud center of excellence in your modernization plan of, okay, is the organization ready for this, right? There are changes outside of IT that happen when I modernize an application, when I move an application to the cloud. Is my organization ready for all the impacts of that? Once I know what I'm trying to accomplish and really what I'll call kind of the scope and the requirements of that, now I'm ready to select a cloud platform. Right, as I look at it and say, okay, is this best fit in the data center? And maybe I just turn it into more of a private cloud via some modernization techniques we'll talk about in a minute. Is it best suited in the public cloud? Is it best suited in a third-party cloud service, right? There's hundreds, if not thousands of niche cloud services. And then what does that mean for my multi-cloud architecture overall, right? As I continue to have more distributed users and more distributed applications, I as IT have to think about things like I'm on the hook for deploying it with high availability architecture. I need to make sure it has predictable and consistent performance. And then I need to maintain control and visibility. I need to maintain security, compliance, and governance. right? That's no small order to do as IT. And every time you deploy a new workload in a modernized fashion, you think about how that overall impacts your multi-cloud architecture. So now you know where you're going. It's time to start building, right? And this isn't assuming it's your first time going to the cloud, but what it's assuming is that you may not have the cloud platform you need for that specific workload. So maybe you've done test dev and sandbox and you need to move PII, PHI into the cloud. You need to fortify your foundation. And we call that an enterprise cloud foundation. You need to think about things like networking and security, identity and access management, data protection. All those things are critical before putting that workload and that data out there. And then you start thinking about, okay, modernization techniques. Am I going to just lift and shift this and run it in the cloud? Am I going to containerize and move it in a newly more portable fashion? Or am I going to go out and fully refactor, modernize, rewrite the application for cloud native services? The reality of it is you're probably going to do some form of all of those things on each journey. But understanding which piece goes where is really critical. And then you move into this concept of ongoing management and optimization, or day two cloud operations, which is all about, if I'm running something in a new modernized state in a new cloud-based platform, I need to think about how do I optimize for cost continuously, because that's critical in cloud. I need to optimize for security, for best practices, because it's a very dynamically changing environment, a very dynamically changing attack surface. So how do I make sure I'm properly protected and optimized there? And then think about people, tools, and process. So for my team and for my tools, where do I need to modernize skill sets, invest in people? How do I take a combination of existing tools that you have today, where you have investments, but also look at next generation tools to make sure you've got all the visibility and insights that you need? All that together is what I'll call either the modernization lifecycle or the cloud adoption lifecycle. And it's a circle here graphically, because as I mentioned, this is a rinse and repeat type of cycle. And it's something where the more effective you can be going through it, the more efficient you can be, the better service provider you can be back to the business, because you can churn workloads through for modernization. So I always encourage organizations, you want to get as efficient as possible inside of this life cycle. And you're going to have variations for your specific organization. This isn't blanket for everybody, but you tweak and tune this, you make it your own, and then you create something that every time you do it gets better, and you can start churning things through it as efficiently as possible. So all that being said, let's tackle data center modernization. This concept here, I break it into 4 phases. The first one is just kind of basic and reactive, which is where we all started in IT, which is about, I've got a lot of hardware, I've got a lot of software, I'm managing everything on its own. There tends to be a long lead time to get things done. There tends to be shadow IT just because you're not that agile. I think we all came from there, and many have started maturing past that into more of this phase 2 integrated, which is about infrastructure consolidation, right? I start to go to converged and hyper-converged infrastructure, simplifying the way that I do things. I start to look at a more software-defined approach. I'm not quite there yet, but I start to adopt that. And I start to look at less integration points, reduce risk, and I also consider managed services for things that may or may not be core competencies of the organization, not necessarily things that we do that make us money as an organization. So I offload those tasks so that my really high skilled team can put those efforts into things that are more valuable to business. Now we get to where a lot of organizations are starting to get to now, is the concept of optimize and automate. So start to get to self-service provisioning concepts. You start to have cloud management platforms that can be pervasive across the data center and public cloud deployments. You start to really invest in automation, orchestration, workload mobility, with really aspiration of getting this concept of true private cloud. And what true private cloud is it's a kind of a set of characteristics that you would attribute to public cloud, right? So it's burstable, it's consumption-based cost model, it's really a fully managed stack, it's a digital transformation platform. I know very few companies who are actually all the way here. Many are in, I'll call it 2.5, right, in between integrated and optimized and automated. But I think that aspiration to get to true private cloud is what drives a lot of modernization projects. So I'll call this the modern data center reference architecture. If you look at the bottom of the stack, these are the things that we as infrastructure people have focused on forever, is building data center infrastructure, putting a hypervisor on top of that, and then deploying VMs, right? And that's what we've all lived doing forever. Now the maturation of that comes into things like containers and container orchestration, right? Now I start to modernize there. I start to turn it into an actual private cloud where I leverage even things like cloud-like flexibility, burst capacity, maybe some financial cost models that allow me to pay as I use it, even for the hardware sitting in my data center. And then I start to deploy in the public cloud. But graphically, you can see that the public cloud is sitting on the outside at this point. I don't really have an enterprise hybrid cloud until I start to do things. And those things aren't just that cool dotted line that I put around it, but you've got to start to add things like federation of networking and security services, right? How can I start to extend my networking and security policy, procedure, tools, technologies from the data center into the cloud so I have one management plane and I have continuity and consistency? How do I then take and think about hybrid cloud data services? Okay, I've got all this data and it's most valuable if I can federate it out into the most cost-effective, best place to be able to get the most out of it. So you start to federate data sets out and they're across data center and public cloud as necessary. And then with that comes hybrid cloud data protection and making sure that data is protected, again, in a consistent fashion with what I'm doing on-prem. Because one of the biggest pitfalls I see is people assume that things go to the cloud, that they're more highly protected than in the data center. In this whole shared responsibility model, the onus of data protection really sits on the end user in a lot of cases. There's only so much that's done by the cloud providers. So what I'd like to talk about here is so a couple examples around what NetApp and AWS are specifically doing as strategic partners, for a lot of my customers, for my organization, how they're helping make this happen. There's a lot of ways to make this happen, but I think these two companies have really invested. AWS in being, absolute leader in cloud services, always blazing a trail, probably has deployed 5 new services since we've been talking over the past 23 minutes. And NetApp really investing in this concept of this data fabric, right? Is that, the data center and the cloud are just places you run applications, that you house data. And if you could start to make that look like one cohesive enterprise architecture that's multi-cloud, then you're going to be the most valuable service provider back to the business. And so they've invested a lot in tools and technologies like within this, modern data center reference architecture show that turns a lot of this on. So kind of reflecting back to that stack I showed you a minute ago, down at the bottom, infrastructure, right? Kind of table stakes, multiple different ways that NetApp does that with FlexPod and with HCI in helping people simplify infrastructure, building creative financing programs. So they've got ways that they're allowing, customers to add burst capacity, to create consumption-based cost models, to really start to consume the data center as a service. And then where it gets really unique here is this concept, I don't know if you see my cursor, but having ONTAP, the operating system for NetApp, federated into the cloud, right? So now I can take common management tools that I'm used to as an infrastructure team, and I can leverage those in the cloud when I'm not ready to go start managing some of those cloud native tools. And then you start to federate. Now I've got workloads you can see that are living in VMs on-prem. They're sitting in EC2 instances in AWS. You have containers that are portable back and forth. And then you have container orchestration that can orchestrate the deployment, the migration, the management of all those. And then taking networking solutions like ACI, NSX, there's a handful of them out there where I can now start to federate out that network architecture, my security posture, my segmentation, my management plane, all those things are going to start to federate out into AWS. And then the blue part up top, where I think there's a lot of really unique capabilities for NetApp specifically, is this concept of data fabric, right? And the whole fabric of what you're doing across data center and cloud, it really comes down to data, because data powers applications. And they've got ways to help have that data federated across by leveraging pools that can move data around, by replicating data out there so that I can start to use consistent management tools and methodologies that I'm used to on-prem. And I can use NetApp native tools sitting in AWS, even if I'm not leveraging NetApp on-prem, right? So there's a lot of ways that is being brought to the forefront. So a couple of things that I would highlight here in the whole kind of better together concept. Number one is when we look at ways to leverage NetApp in the cloud with AWS specifically, it's all about efficiency, right? So cost on the first one and performance with the second one. NetApp's always been a leader in data efficiency, deduplication, snapshots, ways to store your data, protect your data, utilizing less, more simple and more simple methodologies and less storage. So that's something that becomes pervasive. ONTAP can actually add performance efficiencies on top of AWS cloud native storage. So it's going to give you benefits on both the reduction and the performance side. Then you get into portability, which is, I think, where this gets really unique. And I'm going to talk about the most common use case in a minute of disaster recovery that we see all the time. But having the ability to port your data in any format over to AWS and continue to leverage it in a consistent fashion is something that is really beneficial to customers that aren't ready to fully modernize. This concept of full modernization of all application stacks is a 5 to 10 year process for most companies. So the idea of being able to be portable and have a hybrid modernization strategy is really, really impactful. And then down at the bottom, this is all about protection, security, privacy. So data protection is all about how we are making sure our data is recoverable within the platform it sits in, cross-platform, making sure it's fully protected. And then under security and privacy, this is all about cloud compliance. And I can store data anywhere I want, but in order to be compliant, it's really important that I go out there and identify where does sensitive data sit. Where does it sit? What is it? How do I need to protect it? And have continuous insights into that. Because if I don't know where the sensitive data is, I can't protect it. And that insight is absolutely critical in being able to have the right strategy. So finally, before we flip into Q&A, the use case that I wanted to talk about here was cloud disaster recovery is the #1 use case that I've seen a lot of organizations go into as they're going down their modernization path and realizing that moving my production applications and modernizing them is not a 2-month process. It costs a lot of money. It takes a lot of time to modernize that tier 1 and tier 2 application stack. But there's a lot of efficiencies in accessing cloud and using it. So what are low-hanging fruit? One is backup targets, right? Is getting backup data offsite. But the most impactful I've seen is giving yourself the ability to recover in the cloud, right? So full disaster recovery. And I know this is a little tough to read on the slide, but the concept here is you've got your corporate data center, and in this case, we're assuming that you're leveraging NetApp storage in here. And what you want to be able to do is you want to be able to leverage what you have invested and use AWS as a disaster recovery platform, because it allows you to avoid purchasing a disaster recovery site or leasing a co-location. It allows you to avoid running all that costly infrastructure to have all the servers, the network, the storage, the security, all those components deployed, hoping that you never use them to do anything. And then it allows you to really just turn it on, burst on demand, and use it whenever. And it also allows you to start to build those skill sets, managing an AWS environment day to day without having to manage those new native prod applications. It's a great way to learn, right? How to run a VPC, how to leverage some of those new services and dabble in a sandbox that isn't production day 1. So an example I'll use alongside of this is had a customer, a hospital, where they had NetApp infrastructure deployed and they wanted to do DR. They needed to shut off their co-location facility, and they had a couple months to do it. And what we did was we helped them go out there and we set up a VPC in AWS for recoverability. We helped them build their replication of all of their NetApp-based services using SnapMirror, which is the native NetApp replication, to get that data into AWS. And then we ran, if you see over here, this whole concept in this white box is Cloud Volumes ONTAP is a virtual version of NetApp. So it has all the capabilities of standard of a physical NetApp filer. So you can replicate data over to it. Your data is sitting there ready to be accessed. And then you can start to burst up all of your compute needs and everything else when it comes time to actually fail over. So for them, there was a hybrid model of they ran some live services out in the VPC. They had domain controllers. They had some security services they needed to run. They had some virtual firewalls that they wanted to federate out firewall rule sets and everything. So they did all that. They built out this fully functional VPC. We built out all of the networking with them to make sure it was fully ready for failover. And then we leveraged the NetApp technology for replication and for federation of those file shares and of the VMs and just used standard tools. So they didn't have to go out and learn a whole bunch of new things to make that happen. And it allowed them to turn things up very, very quickly. They were able to get out of their co-location, lease as at the time they need to, so they did need to extend. And ultimately, they've been able to do testing failover much more frequently than they were able to previously because of how easy and cheap it is to fail over and only pay for those resources when they use them. So one of many use cases, but this is one that I see all the time. There's a lot of use cases around backup, around DevOps, and being able to rapidly spin up, copies of workloads for DevOps types of capabilities. There's a lot of AI/ML use cases, but I see DR as kind of that low-hanging fruit for a lot of companies. So that being said, we all want to modernize, right? And it doesn't have to be as complicated as you think. Is kind of what I would say. To recap. I'd always recommend take a crawl, walk, run approach. Nobody that I know is shutting down enterprise data centers overnight and just trying to flip everything to the cloud. And those that I do know they're struggling with it because that's not an easy process. And the path of modernization is a really, really powerful one, but it's also one that it takes time, it takes planning, it takes effort. So, these are ways that you can kind of start to get down that crawl, walk, run path. And hopefully I was able to highlight some of the concepts that will help you get there, just to operationally get your organization ready for that that culture shift and that being able to churn workloads through that process, but also ways that you can leverage some of the familiar tool sets to be able to do that without completely updating and augmenting all of your existing skill sets and tools today. So that's what I had. Taking a peek here at the Q&A. And okay, so someone just sent one in. It says, what is your sense of enterprises that go 100% one public cloud versus a hybrid model, and why go to a hybrid model? Awesome, fantastic question. So I get this one a lot. Is should I deploy all in AWS? Should I deploy all in Azure? Should I have applications that are live in AWS and have a DR copy in Azure? People worried about lock-in. There's a million ways to look at that. The answer, as much as I hate to say it depends, is it depends on what you want to accomplish. And the reason I say that is the way to get the most power and efficiency out of the cloud is to leverage cloud native capabilities wherever possible, right? Is to start building into cloud native databases, elastic front ends, like all those services I mentioned earlier that people don't even know what they do. Those are the most powerful parts of the cloud of AWS. The challenge with that is when you build cloud natively, you're building for that cloud. So I build something specifically into an AWS service, it's obviously AWS captive. So no, I cannot pick that up and move it to another cloud at that point. So if you have something you're trying to get hyper efficient with and leverage true power cloud, I'll encourage you to really go all in, right? And do some of those things that AWS is doing with those native services, because you're really going to unlock a lot of power and you're going to be very cost efficient as well. If you want to be extremely portable, you're going to be leveraging a lot more of an infrastructure as a service. And now I can containerize things and I can move them back and forth. Those containers can interact with native services, but they themselves are not going to be quite as powerful as they were if you totally refactored them. So it's all about what's more valuable. Is it portability, or is it really that true cloud native functionality? I see very few companies doing this idea of federating an application across AWS and Azure. I know it's a cool concept everybody likes to talk about, but the challenge is they're very distinctly different platforms. So to run something, in kind of an active-active or even active-passive fashion requires a lot of updating on both sides of the coin there. And I don't know that you get all of that much out of it because of the way that you can do multi-availability zone deployments and things with best practices with AWS. If you deploy it the right way in AWS, at that point, you're really mitigating against either AWS going out of business or all of AWS going down. And if either of those things happen, I think we're all in a lot more trouble than just your application. So I get that question all the time. What I say though, when it comes back to why go to a hybrid model, is it's all about best service, best place, right? So there's certain things that are going to be better suited for AWS services, and there's going to be better things that are suited for your data center and better things that are suited elsewhere. So find what is the thing that best suits the application of the workload that you're looking to modernize, identify what your requirements are. And if you think back to that circle I showed, that second piece about platform selection, choose the best possible platform. I do encourage you to, invest more in one than the other. I see a lot of customers really going hard down the AWS path because they view that as the best place for most of their applications. And so if an application can go here or there, it's going to go here. But if there's something that really should go there, then you put it there. All right, we've got another question. This is, what is the fastest way to acquire cloud expertise? Man, that's a tough one. Hands-on is absolutely the best way. You can read all you want to. There's a lot of online tools that'll give you access to cloud labs. I encourage everybody should have an AWS account, right? You can sign up in the free tier. You can do a lot of stuff in the free tier of AWS as personally, and not incur a single dollar worth of charges. So I absolutely recommend that. I recommend tools like A Cloud Guru, which will give you really prescriptive methodology for going through the learning paths that AWS and others have out there. AWS has awesome learning paths that are on their website, which will show publicly available content that you can take. They've got a really great path down from cloud practitioner, which allows you to know kind of overall cloud architecture, then solutions architect, associate and professional, DevOps, associate and professional. They've got security specialties. So I always recommend follow the paths of the cloud providers, especially AWS, because it's really prescriptive. The other thing is something we do for our customers a lot is there's this concept called an AWS game day, which is something where what we'll do is we'll build out these AWS lab environments. And it's a role play gamified type of approach where we will, there'll be a fictitious story, right? Like, let's say your company was acquired by somebody and you need to turn off all of your services and have them migrated to AWS by the end of the day. And you're handed a fake on-prem environment that's fully simulated, and you need to move all those services within the allotted amount of time over to AWS. And there's no right or wrong way to do it, and there's no lab manual. So you get in there and you start doing it. There's hints and all that. You're not going to get stuck, but it allows you to use your own way of doing it. And at the end, everyone compares their notes, and you actually get points on a leaderboard for how well you modernized and how agile you were, and did you create an elastic front end to allow for burst traffic. And those I've seen as being really impactful situations to get into, because it's totally risk-free, hands-on, and ways that give you a chance to play. So what I'll tell you is, I'm happy to put you in contact with people from my team from AWS to do those types of things, because I think it's a fantastic way to learn. All right, handful more here. What are the security issues to consider going into the cloud, and where are pinch points that require deep knowledge? It's a very broad question. It is, I'll say that there's a lot of confusion on when to leverage a cloud native service versus a third party. So example I'll give you is, when should I leverage a cloud native firewall versus when should I leverage a Cisco, Palo Alto, Checkpoint, Fortinet, F5, insert your favorite vendor here. When should I deploy a hub and spoke architecture where I funnel all of my traffic into and out of AWS into specific on-ramps so that I can have visibility, I can monitor it, I can secure it, I can provide high availability and high performance via direct connects, via having, more of a federated architecture. I think a lot of it comes into the connectivity and the edge, in making sure you have a very intentional connectivity strategy about how you're going to take all these end users and get them access to these services that are very likely going to touch services that run elsewhere. So I have services running in AWS that rely on data points that live in the data center, live in a SaaS platform, live in Azure, live wherever. And I need to architect my traffic in a way that it doesn't ping pong all over the country to get to where it's going, but also where I maintain complete control and visibility into that traffic. Because if you consider the cloud a black box, and the networking team handles data center networking and the cloud team handles cloud networking, that's going to get you in a lot of trouble, because you're both going to be looking at through very different lenses, and that handoff's going to not be smooth, and you're going to have a lot of finger pointing and challenges there. So I could have multiple hour conversation around security issues in the cloud in general, but I'd say pinch points tend to be connectivity design in a multi-cloud world, and then the edge, and then the identification of sensitive data that's going out there, and making sure that you're protecting it the right way. All right, let's see here. Does folks like ePlus provide services to take cloud off my plate? Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think that you're not going to find anybody in the industry that is going to do everything cloud for you, regardless of who you are. I think that there's so many services in cloud, like I mentioned in that periodic table, that your goal is to find somebody who helps you fill the gaps and helps you learn and helps you bring the right people and expertise in. And there's going to be some things you're just not going to want to manage. So I see people offload some of those monotonous things that are in cloud. I think some of the lowest hanging fruit are optimization of cost, right? Cost management is a big one, because that doesn't just require a tool and insights, but it requires a practice and people focusing on it. You can't just look at your cloud infrastructure for cost plus practices one time and then fix and move on, because you're going to continue to drift and have ways you should optimize. The number I saw from last year is that the average company wasted 35% of their cloud spend in 2019. And that was pre-COVID, when people are accelerating going to the cloud. So I can only imagine that's going to be worse this year. So I think cost management is one that I see people offloading a lot. I see security monitoring, so security posture management, right? Again, a combination of a tool and a managed service to look at the security posture of your cloud against common frameworks and rule sets like HIPAA, SOX, all those types of things, but also looking at configuration drift and making sure that you can be notified immediately if something drifts out of the configuration standard you built, as well as giving audit level security compliance reports. So I see that one outsourced a lot. And then data protection is the other one, looking for kind of a turnkey solution to just manage the back of a replication of my workloads in addition to the high availability architecture. I know at ePlus, those are things that we do. There's a million managed services you can find out there, but I see those as the most common that people are looking for, because if you think about cloud, managed cloud, quote unquote, a lot of that's done by the cloud provider. You don't have to manage the infrastructure anymore. So you take it up a level, and I think cost, security, and data protection are those top two. All right, and then the final question I see is, should I have a separate cloud team or have them located in the various teams, platform, network, DBA, security, application, et cetera? So fantastic question. I had up on one of my slides the term Cloud Center of Excellence. So that is a concept that I see being adopted a lot of places right now. And the whole idea of Cloud Center of Excellence is these are your change agents across the organization for modernization and cloud. And what that means is there are people to live in all the cross-functional parts of the organization that will help smooth the process of that modernization in areas that IT might not think of. So, listing out platform, network, DBA, security, application, all absolutely perfect places to look at. But I would expand that list to be security, compliance, contracts, sales, right? All these things that we don't think of as IT necessarily, but think of it if, let's say that your organization brings in customer data and you make a decision, you're going to start to archive that data off to AWS because it's more cost effective. And then you find out that your contracts team and sales teams have actually been writing into every customer contract that my data will only sit in my data centers, right? If you didn't have that cross-functional team to explore that, you could have put your organization in a really bad spot. So the whole concept of CCOE is I identify all the critical areas of my organization, one person that actually lives in those groups. They're not employees of a cloud team. They're not employees of IT, but they're employees of whatever team they live on. Their job is to be the change agent and champion for modernization and cloud. Doesn't mean that they're full-time dedicated to that. It also doesn't mean that they're the ones doing all the work, right? That person in contracts is just the one who can bridge the gap of what IT is thinking about doing and what contracts needs to consider, and then can champion that conversation to the right people that can make that change. If you don't have that, you're going to get hung up on phase one of that cloud adoption or modernization lifecycle all the time. Or even worse, you'll go through it and then you're going to hit a huge snag because you're going to find out you did something that broke something organizationally elsewhere. So, I do think that in the world of IT, see a lot more DevOps and DevSecOps teams start to being built, where it's all about how do we get those teams integrating better, how do I make sure that security, continuous innovation, modernization are all, kind of just paramount aspects of everything that we do. And that's where DevOps and DevSecOps start to fit in. But I think, that it's always, you're always going to have subject matter experts in each area. So hopefully I answered your question there, but I'd say if you have not talked about CCOE internally, even informally, it's a fantastic thing. Even if it's just you and a handful of people that are dabbling with it, it's a great exercise to start going through. and the final question, which I absolutely appreciate, is the framed champs newspaper behind you is for whom? And that is for the Super Bowl champion 2006 Indianapolis Colts. So I'm a Colts fan living in Chicago that drives 3 hours for every game with my season tickets. Although they just sent us a message saying that they may not have fans in the stadium this year. So I do appreciate that though, because it gives me a shameless plug for the Colts. All right, Nick, I think that's all we got.
Yeah, I think so. That was fantastic, Justin. I appreciate it. Comprehensive. Appreciate your energy, especially on this Zoom format. It's sometimes, you know, can get a little less energetic. So I appreciate you bringing it today.
Appreciate you.
For everyone who attended, thank you so much. We have a whole series of these that are ongoing almost every week. I think we have 4 or 5 in the pipeline on our website right now, so please check it out. Again, thank you to ePlus, thank you to NetApp, thank you to AWS who are helping us put these events on and are our sponsors for the day. And last but not least, thank you again, Justin, for your time and expertise today.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
All right, everyone. We'll see you next time on Tech It Yourself. Thanks so much for joining.